So good morning to all of you. Jai Bhim. So respected dignitaries on and off the dais, the important officials of FCI, other beloved friends and colleagues and brothers and sisters. It's indeed an honor and a great occasion today to speak about Baba Saheb Ambedkar and his vision of India, especially his democratic and just vision of our country, especially in a context when our nation, our society, our polity, everything in this country, everything is going through the most crucial and unprecedented kind of a crisis, especially regarding the political and social processes and institutions and the basic institution of democracy and the goal of the founding fathers of our Constitution. So this crisis, it is created through a series of, sabotages of our constitutional ethos and values. Our Constitution, the democratic way of life that was imagined by Baba Saheb, the culture of coexistence and tolerance, and that of participatory and inclusive social democracy that was constructed literally by the life efforts of Baba Saheb and other great leaders of our nation. That dream of equal justice and liberty and fraternity, the foundational values of our Constitution, the modern democratic values of the idea of our republic, all these things are facing very crucial, serious, grave problems and issues in the present. So it is in this kind of a context that we are discussing about Ambedkar and his idea and his imagination and his dream of a just and egalitarian society in India and a democratic kind of a republic in India. So we know that the idea of the republic, it evolved through ages in India. It is not a product of a few decades or a few struggles for independence. But the struggle for equality and justice in this country has a long kind of legacy and a long history and genealogy as well. Actually, as Baba Saheb has taught us, it is from the Buddha and his Sangha, the egalitarian society that was initiated by the Buddha some 2,600 years ago, that Baba Saheb has taken the inspiration for creating a new democratic republic in India. He also utilized the model of the West because his education was from the West mostly. We know that. He was born as an untouchable in India, in the Mahar community in Maharashtra, towards the end of the 19th century. And that period is known for imperialism and the colonial rule of the British in India. So fortunately, under this Western intervention and British imperialism, modern education and the partial benefits of modernity at large from the West, the Enlightenment modernity of the West, the ideas of liberty, equality, and fraternity that came to prominence in late 19th or even during late 18th century through the French Revolution and other important democratic movements in Britain like the Magna Carta. So the West, in modern times, they were enjoying the fruits of this modernity. And partial modernity reached many parts of the world through the imperial process itself. Imperialism, of course, is the process of making and maintaining empires all over the world. So it is a brutal kind of business. It's an exploitative agenda, we know. But at the same time, for the people in the third world, in Asian African countries, the vast majority of people in places like India, who were suffering under the yoke of internal imperialism of caste and varna in particular, because of the hierarchies of gender and caste in India, the Varnashrama Dharma Vedic project of India, the Chaturvarnyam, or simply called in English as the caste system of India. Because this caste system has been here from almost 2000 years, especially after the period of the great Mauryan Empire, the last Buddhist empire of India. Emperor Ashoka, the Maurya, and Brihadratha and all we know. But unfortunately, the aristocratic patriarchy of India, eventually they have done with this Mauryan Buddhist empire and they established a Brahminical kind of regime all over India. And that is what is epitomized in the codification of the Manusmriti, says Ambedkar himself. The Manusmriti was codified, the Hindu law, the Brahminical casteist law. Manusmriti was codified in order to legitimize the brutal, heinous killing of that last Mauryan emperor, Brihadratha Maurya, by his own militia man, the chief militia person called Pushyamitra Sunga. So that is the establishment through cheat, the Brahminical kingdoms of India. And then we had the Sunga and the Gupta and the other Brahminical rulers, and they have established something called the Manusmriti. The Smriti Shruti Puranas of India came into existence. And that's how the Hindu common sense was created. And it is based on this Dharma Shastras, the Manu Dharma Shastras. Dharma Shastras means, Ambedkar himself, he talks about destroying this textuality, this imperial textuality. This internal empire of caste is the lasting empire in India. And he said, these things are to be destroyed. If we need a nation and a society of equality, if we need liberty, equality, and fraternity, these things are, these pagan Manusmriti Dharma Shastras or this Manudharma Shastras are a constant threat to liberty, equality, and fraternity, and therefore it must be undone. It must be eliminated at the level of knowledge, at the level of discourse. It was not asking for a literal demolition of anything, but epistemological deconstruction, critique, and social transformation. So that was his goal, social transformation towards an egalitarian, equitable, and just society through democratic and peaceful ways, especially through discourses, knowledge discourses like this. So that's why I appreciate the goodwill shown by the Welfare Association, the FCI, SCST Employees Welfare Association, for creating this kind of a knowledge summit or seminar or a kind of knowledge discourse which is based on the idea of prajna, that means compassionate, ethical kind of knowledge, which Baba Sahib has taken from the Buddha. As I told you, some 2,600 years ago, it was the Buddha, Gautama the Buddha, who actually talked about Prajna, Karuna, and Maitri. So these are the foundational ideas on which Ambedkar has based his key concepts of liberty, equality, and fraternity. So true liberty and true equality can be achieved only through cultivating this greater solidarity called brotherhood or sisterhood. Fraternity, developing fraternity, that is the only way, only peaceful and humane and compassionate way for social transformation and establishing and achieving true democracy. If true democracy and justice means real equality and justice for all the people, so it must be nurtured and achieved through compassion and fraternity. So this is the foundation, this is the rockbed of democracy in India. It was pioneered and initiated by the Buddha, and in modern times it was recovered and re-articulated in a more rational and scientific and timely manner by Baba Sahib. So that's why Ambedkar is seen as the modern Buddha or the neo-Buddha of India. And of course the world. Buddha may not be limited to India because his teaching is a universal kind of teaching. It's for the upliftment and deliverance of all the peoples, and not just the people, not just the human, but it surpasses the human because the idea of fraternity in Buddha, the Maitri paradigm that I have talked about, because Baba Sahib has elaborated about it. It's very difficult. We can create a constitution, the law. They are very important and primary in social change and transformation, in creating a nation and a world, an equitable world. But at the same time, it's very difficult to cultivate the culture of Maitri or fraternity. It's very difficult. We cannot do it through legal kind of measures. Through simple legislation, we cannot create this Maitri paradigm, the fraternity. Real fraternity is a culture. Our people, he said, even in that Constitutional Assembly in 1949, November 26, he made that remark that we are entering into a life of contradiction. 1950, next year onwards, when the Republic is on, when the Constitutional Assembly adopts the Constitution, 1950, January 26, we are entering into a life of contradiction because there is no social kind of democracy in India. There is no culture of social kind of democracy in recent times in India, in the medieval India or in the modern India. Only in the ancient India we had it during the time of the Buddha up to the time of Ashoka. After that, it was unfortunately lost or destroyed by the pagan kind of priestly patriarchal religion in India. So therefore, our people will have to learn it through hard labor and pain. It's a difficult task. Creating and maintaining and nurturing unconditional kind of brotherhood and sisterhood, it's a difficult task. You will have to address many challenges. You will have to embrace your opponents. You will have to suffer a lot and sacrifice a lot. You have to compromise a lot, but for the greater goal of the greater common good. So that kind of Maitri, which surpasses even the human and which encompasses and which embraces the whole universe, universal brotherhood and sisterhood, that kind of fraternity was reimagined by Baba Sahib to create this modern republic in India. So it is not an easy task. It is not just for the scheduled castes and scheduled tribes. That's another very important dimension of Ambedkar's redemption and liberative act. It's not just for the Dalits and the other oppressed communities of India, but for the whole nation. He has created this Maitri paradigm. It's a model for the whole world. So that's why today the world is acknowledging it. Today we have Ambedkar's ideology, especially his cultural and philosophical kind of arguments and ideas in the formation of something called Navayana. The Navayana Buddhism of Ambedkar is embraced by the people even in Europe. The disprivileged and challenged sections of society in Europe and the developed parts of Asia, in Japan, in Hungary in Europe, in Hungary and Germany. The outcasts of Europe, the untouchables of modern Europe, the Romani people, the Romas or the Gypsies of Europe, they are embracing the philosophy of Baba Saheb. This social democracy and Navayana neo-Buddhist paradigm of Ambedkar is being acknowledged and embraced by them. And they have started many schools and institutions for their children in the name of Ambedkar and the Buddha himself. So this is the new changed world where Ambedkar is seen as one of the greatest liberators of the modern world. Specifically after the Buddha, he is counted as the neo-Buddha not just in India, but in many parts of the developed world itself, in Europe, in Hungary, and also the Barak Humin of Japan, the untouchables of Japan, in Japan also, which is boasting about its Mahayana and Vajrayana form of Buddhism. It's a combination of Buddhism. A strange Buddhism is there in Japan and Korea, in many parts of Southeast Asian countries. They are boasting about their Buddhism, but unfortunately, the ancient First Nations of those regions, they are called the Barakumin, the Aborigines. They are discriminated against. They are not treated equally. And Ambedkar went to, in 1950s, when he went to Sri Lanka to study about the ancient forms of Theravada Buddhism, he appealed in the World Buddhist Conference, he appealed to all the Sri Lankan Buddhists, because they are having Buddhism as their religion. It is the major religion and the leading religion there. But even in Sri Lanka in 1950s, some Aborigines were not treated as equal. So Ambedkar, when he went to Sri Lanka, he appealed to the Sri Lankans to stop that kind of injustice. This double speak. If you are preaching the religion of the Buddha, it is nothing but equality and liberty and fraternity. So you must show real equality and real fraternity to your ancient brethren. That was the appeal. So this is still happening. Still happening in Japan, where you have the untouchables. You have the second or third class citizens there, the ancient people. So they are called the Barakumin, the Barakumin. So the Barakumin have also embraced and acknowledged the philosophy of Ambedkar now. So this is the universal dimension of his liberating philosophy and praxis that at least the people of India must acknowledge. So anyway, the world has acknowledged Baba Saheb, and we must also try to acknowledge his universal contribution. So that's why I said, this is not for the Dalits and Bahujans and women of India. Ambedkar abandoned his political power. He relinquished his post. He resigned from the first cabinet of Nehru because he stood for justice, the idea of justice. The idea of gender justice in particular. He was not just for social justice and forms of social democracy at large, but even in the specific issue of the rights of women, gender equality and gender justice. He stood with that. And that's why he resigned from the Union Minister's post from the cabinet of Nehru, because he was for the property rights and propriety rights of women. It was denied to women in India. Through legalization, by drafting the constitution, Ambedkar has tried his maximum to achieve, to legalize, to create legislative kind of inputs in the constitution towards gender justice. But it was not equally accepted by the people in the 1956. So he had to resign. Before that, from 1947 to 1952, he was the first Law and Justice Minister of the Indian Union, because he was the chairman of the drafting committee of the Constitution. He was also the lead member of the Constitutional Assembly of India. So that's why Nehru and others, they had to invite him to become the first Justice and Law Minister of India. But he abandoned that because he was for the value and ideal and principle of gender equality and gender justice as well. So that shows the keen sense of the principle and how he has practiced his principles, how he practiced what he preached. That is the life of Ambedkar that is before us. So Ambedkar is also a champion of gender justice, not just social justice, not just social democracy, not just state legislation and jurisprudence and politics at large, but he is also the champion of gender justice that is being acknowledged by all the leading women activists and feminists of India today. The leading Indian feminists, they acknowledge Ambedkar as a champion of their gender justice cause and the rights of women. Recently, Professor Sharmila Rege of Maharashtra, she was a professor of sociology at Savitribai Phule Women's University in Pune. She passed away a couple of years ago. But before she passed away, she has written something called, she has edited and compiled an anthology of Ambedkar's writing on gender justice, on the rights of women. That is called Against the Madness of Manu. Against the Madness of Manu. We mentioned about Manusmriti, the Black Book of India, the text of Chaturvarnya, the double speak, the Brahminical law, the patriarchal and aristocratic kind of law that is actually a double speak, which actually gives punishment not according to the crime that is committed, but according to the caste of the criminal or the convict. So that's why it's called a casteist book. So that is the madness of Manu, according to Indian feminists like Sharmila Rege. So against the madness of Manu, Baba Saheb Ambedkar on Brahminical Patriarchy, that is the book in which you find Ambedkar's own writing on the critique of Brahminical Patriarchy that are being elaborated and commented and compiled by one of the contemporary feminists of India like Sharmila Rege. Many other Indian feminists, Uma Chakrabarti for example, she has taken the key idea, the critical idea of Brahminical Patriarchy from Ambedkar's writing. So this is now being used by all the social scientists, not just in India, but across the world. Dalit feminist historians like Anupama Rao, for example, Anupama Rao has taken it to the West. Dorothy Figuera, a Spanish-American academic and author, she has written about Bhimayana. She has created a book called Bhimayana, that is on Ambedkar's Navyana and his philosophy of critiquing this Brahminical patriarchy. So this has become a global discourse. Now people of Europe, they have also written books on Ambedkar. Recently, Cosimo in Italy, he has written Cosimo Zene, that is the full name of the Italian scholar. Cosimo Zene, the Italian scholar and academic, he has written a book comparing Ambedkar's philosophy with the political philosophy of Antonio Gramsci, the political philosophy of Antonio Gramsci and Babasaheb Ambedkar, the trajectories of Dalits and Subaltern. That is the book by Cosimo Zene, comparing the political philosophy of Ambedkar, the social democracy paradigm, with the Italian Marxist, neo-Marxist thinker and philosopher, Antonio Gramsci himself. So the world has acknowledged, the global academia has acknowledged, and they are using it, not just the ordinary people and the gypsies or the Romani or the Barak women or the untouchables, but the lead scholars of the world, from Dorothy Figuera, the Spanish-American woman scholar, to Cosimo Zene in Italy, they have acknowledged and they have written elaborately on Ambedkar. And people from the West, people from America, and he had his education in America, we know, Columbia. He was one of the earliest scholars to go to Columbia and get his MA and doctoral degree from Columbia. And also he went to Britain under London University, the LSE, London School of Economics, and he had his, again, one more MSc and DSc, again in economics from the London School of Economics. So that kind of scholarship and that kind of acknowledgement, and only in recently that he was given the Bharat Ratna in India. And recently that we have acknowledged the CNN IBN channel and the History channel, they had that greatest Indian scholar kind of contest. And that kind of popular competitions and contests were there, where Ambedkar was repeatedly elected and identified as the greatest scholar of India and one of the greatest scholars of the 20th century in the whole world. So this is now being acknowledged by the whole world. But unfortunately, his critical works, especially dealing with castes in India, annihilation of caste, and also about untouchability issues of India, the Chaturvarnya system, who are the untouchables, how they became so, and also about the annihilation of caste and about the Shudras, who are the Shudras, and how they became the fourth Varna of the Indo-Aryan society. What Gandhi and the untouchables have done to what Gandhi and the Congress have done to the untouchables, and the riddles of Rama and Krishna, the riddles of Hinduism, critique on the philosophy of Hinduism. All these works are not much discussed in India and in Indian universities, not adequately in some universities. For example, we are at Kaladi, we have been teaching in the English department. I am from the English department. And we have been teaching at least from 2006 onwards some texts, only certain selections, his philosophy of Hinduism, certain extracts from the essential writings of P.R. Ambedkar. We have the 17 volumes by the government of Maharashtra. But only recently, only this month, only in 2022, the government has created a portal. A web portal where only 17 volumes are available, but many volumes are also missing. Dr. Ambedkar speeches and writing, some kind of new portal is being created by the union government now, but it is too late. It's too late. But of course, we are having some Dalit Bahujan portals and websites, Ambedkar.com and many other websites were offering these things, the PDFs, the complete PDFs of Ambedkar text, all these 17 volumes are available in other Dalit kind of portals. So the problem that I am raising is this: though he is the architect of the Constitution of India, though he has created the foundational values of the Republic, and therefore he is actually the creator of the modern Indian Democratic Republic, though he is not acknowledged as the so-called father of the nation, but is actually the dream child of the nation and the future of India. But his texts are not available completely from the public sources of the government-aided kind of institutions or initiatives. And his texts are not completely taught in the universities and schools. Many things, his autobiographical writing, waiting for a visa, or many other incidents in his life struggle. Even when we must remember one thing, he was a child who was unable to touch even water. This happened towards the end of the 19th century in a British military school. In other schools, the untouchables they couldn't even go near those schools. They had to carry some brooms and pots and many other things of the caste system. He got education because of the colonial modern paradigm that I mentioned, because his father and grandfather, they were in the British army. His father was a Subedar, having the rank of a Subedar in the British army, and also he was a trainer. He was teaching other militia people English language and writing and so on and so forth. So from Maloji Sakpal's time, even before that, we have from early 19th century, we have the Mahas in the British army. So that is the importance of Bhima Koregaon also, 1817 and 1818, Bhima Koregaon, where the Mahar regiment, they defeated the Peshwa Brahminical militias. They far outnumbered the Mahas, but they stood the ground and they defeated the Brahminical and Shudra militia of the Peshwas from the British side, or the British Royal Army. So that legacy was there with the Mahas of Maharashtra, and that's why we have Maloji Sakpal and later Ramji Sakpal becoming very influential in the British establishment. That's why he got that English education. But even when he went to that British military school, he had to sit at the back row on an old rag or sack, and he couldn't even go near the water pot. He couldn't touch it. The peon will have to come. If the peon is on leave, he may not get a drop of water. That was the suffering. And we know in those narratives he describes when he and his siblings, they had to go without taking water for days when they were traveling. And another very important moment we need to remember is the last days of Ambedkar, when he was, after his resignation from the cabinet, he is the chairman of the Constitutional Drafting Committee. He was the first Justice and Law Minister, and then he became the Member of Parliament in Rajya Sabha. And when he was the Member of the Parliament, he was denied access to the tomb of Chokkamela. That is one thing that we should always remember. Even when he was the member of the parliament, Ambedkar was denied access to a place in India, a public place of worship in India. Chokkamela saint, an untouchable saint. His own community man, Chokkamela, a Mahar saint. And when he was Vaishnavized and he was made into a canonized saintly figure, Ambedkar was denied an opportunity to pay his homage to his own kind of ancestor, Chokkamela. So this happened in India. So this is the warning that he has given in the Constitutional Assembly. And that is why he said, we are trying to make a palace on the cow dung. We don't have this in medieval modern times. In recent times, we don't have this culture of fraternity and democracy. So it's very difficult. It's almost an impossible game unless we show extreme vigilance and continuous, consistent, concerted efforts and unless we guard our democracy, it will be destroyed, because we don't have that culture of social democracy. We are entering into a life of contradiction. So these issues, the speeches and writings of Ambedkar, must be taught in the classrooms, must be taught from the very young age, from the school days to the colleges and universities in particular. And these things must be discussed in the media. These things must be continuously made into social debates like this. Whenever there is a gathering of the Dalit Bahujans in particular, it deals with the civil society and the citizenry of India at large. But at least the Dalit Bahujans must engage with his writings and speeches and ideas. And we must create a continuous dialogue and discourse and a dialogical kind of propaganda, a positive kind of campaign continuously, so that these ideals are not lost or not subdued or discarded by the kind of ruling elites and the kind of status quo forces that are there, that are hijacking the constitution today. So the vested interests of the ruling elites and the traditionally advantaged groups in India, they have hijacked the legacy of Ambedkar, and also they have appropriated the constitution. That is, his idea of social justice is enshrined and very strategically embedded in the constitution. In many articles of the constitution, he talks about the importance of social equality and justice at large. Social justice means giving justice to all the sections of the society. It's a kind of distributive kind of justice, and also it's a representational form of justice. Social justice means the representation of various social groups in the processes of democracy. So without adequate representation, without proper representation, you cannot have democracy and social justice. Representation is the foundational process of democracy. Democracy is nothing but the politics of representation. This is one thing that we need to teach our kids. Most of us have forgotten it. We got some jobs, and social justice paradigm is mere reservation for us, for many of us. Because we are forgetting the long legacy from Buddha to Ambedkar. Again, we need to remember his words. The Buddha, Kabir and Phule, they are my teachers. That's why I said there is a long legacy of the social justice paradigm in India. It's not just beginning with Ambedkar. Ambedkar actually codified, legalized, modernized, and enshrined it into our constitution. But there is a long struggle, at least from the Indus Valley. The struggle has begun. From the Shramanic traditions of Indus Valley to the Buddha, to the Purva Buddhas, to the pre-Buddhas, to the Tirthankaras, to the Buddha, Gautama the Buddha, that struggle we can see. The struggle for challenging this elitism, cultural elitism and exclusion of the people, and the struggle for inclusion and representation. That's the idea of the triple gem. Ambedkar articulated it in English language. That's why we have the dictum, educate, agitate and organize. But it is basically founded on the triple gems of the Buddha. The triple refuges of the Buddha. In 1956, on October 14, Ashoka Vijayadashmi, he embraced it. From Mahatero Chandramani of Burma, he accepted Diksha at Nagpur in the Diksha Bhumi. Even today, thousands of people are going and embracing the Navayana of Ambedkar. So when he took that Diksha, it is the triple gem. That means Buddham, Dhammam and Sangham. So these things are articulated in English language as educate, education for enlightenment. So that is what Buddham is all about. And education, agitation and organization. Agitation means agitation on an ethical ground. So ethics or Dharma, the struggles for Dharma, ethics at large, that is very important. Agitate. And then you need an organization. You will arrive into, organize yourself into. Through ethical struggles, ethical agitations, you will create your own democratic sect. That is the organized sect of the Sangha. So the triple gems are rearticulated in modern English language and idiom by Ambedkar. So it is having that long legacy from the Buddha. He created the Sangha and included the Shudra and Atishudra. It's a term from another teacher of Baba Sahib, that is Mahatma Jyotiba Phule and Savitribai Phule. Salman Sheikh and Zahira Sheikh, they have cooperated with Phule's and created the first schools in 19th century. From 1948 onwards, they have created schools for the untouchable girls in particular in Western India, in Maharashtra. That's the importance of Mahatma Phule. And Phule was, in modern times, he was the first one to critique the dominant form of Brahminical nationalism as well. When he created the Satyashodhak Samaj, he advised his disciples and followers not to cooperate with the Brahminical nationalism that is emerging, because it is an elitist and exclusivist or covet casteist thing, like Sahodaran in Kerala, talking about the repression of nationalism. Deshiyam Jai Vilikku or Bhalatil Jadivadigal. That means those who proclaim nationalism, the jingoistic cultural nationalism in particular, they are actually covet and covered casteists. That is a statement by Sahodaran Ayyappan in Kerala, a lead disciple of Narayana Guru in Kerala. And it is Sahodaran who introduced Baba Sahib to Kerala and Malayalam literature in particular in the 30s and 40s itself, through his journal called Sahodaran. Sahodaran means the brother. And it was started from early 20th century in Kerala, 1917 onwards. He was the first to do the interdining in Kerala. He declared interdining in 1917 in Kerala. He was the first to create the Mishra Vivaha Sangham, or the Society for Intercaste Marriages in Kerala. He also initiated the proclaimed intercaste dining programs in Kerala. In Kochi, he was also a minister here, public works minister. He has deconstructed his own home, the frontage of his home, to create this, to widen this road, this MG road. And he imagined the 3 bridges to wipe in. But unfortunately now these bridges are named after Pashu, or the Gomata. Goshri is the name that is now being given. So anyway, the point is that it was Sahodaran, through his editorials and also his poetry. Through his editorials, he talked about the teachings of Ambedkar in the 1930s itself. And towards the end of the 1940s, when Ambedkar was invited to become the chairman of the drafting committee of the Constitution, Sahodaran Ayyappan has written a poem in praise of Ambedkar. It's an ode to Ambedkar, which is called Caste India. In Caste India, or Jati Bharatam, that is the poem in which Sahodaran salutes Ambedkar. And he acknowledged the contributions of Ambedkar, and he was the first poet from South India to acknowledge it towards the end of the 1940s or early 1950s by saying that your name, Ambedkar, your name would be chanted as a mantra. Ambedkar, your name would be chanted as a Sharana mantra of Buddhism. Because by future India, because you have created a modern, new social justice paradigm and constitution for us. Ambedkar adna Tannama Chaturakshari, Mandramai Jebikim Nandi Dingunna Hritalum Bhavi Bharatam. That is the statement. The future India would chant your name as a Sharana mantra of Buddhism, because you have created this new democratic nation and a constitution, the book of law and a book of ethics for India, which is a model for the whole world. So that is the statement. So unfortunately, now that constitution, the book of ethics and law in India, it is under peril and continuous suspension and deconstruction. It is being abrogated, it is being amended on a day-to-day basis, and whatever ideals are at the foundations, those ideals are defeated, especially the idea of social justice, which is the foundation, the core. The base and the foundation of the Constitution is social justice, giving sufficient, adequate shares to different social sections, especially to those social sections who were denied justice for thousands of years under the Manusmriti regime in India. For the last 2000 years, after the fall of the great Mauryan Buddhist empire, social justice was denied, access to education, access to human rights, all the privileges and cultural and educational and symbolic rights and capitals were denied, especially the basic form of property, land, and even water. Ambedkar began with his struggles for water, Mahad, at Chowda, and he burned the Manusmriti also. He burned the Manusmriti on a Christmas day. I think it was in 1927, after his education, when he came back from Columbia. And when he came back from Columbia, he was made into the military secretary to the king in Baroda. But the military secretary was denied a room to stay. Even from the Parsi inn, Parsi lodge, he was kicked out. He was the military secretary, only next to the king. So this was, and when he went to London, and then he came back with the MSc and DSc in economics, and then he had to begin with the struggles for water, Mahad and Chowda, and then he burned the Manusmriti as a symbolic act to end this That was his appeal also. In Annihilation of Caste, again he, in 1936 volume, Annihilation of Caste, he appeals to undo, to actually demolish, literally explode these things. Because these are constant threats to Manusmriti and other Smriti Shruti Puranas, the internal imperialist textuality of Hinduism. These are constant threats to democracy, equality and liberty. They must be undone. Without that you cannot progress. Not just India, even the world cannot progress without dismantling this imperial evil, this toxic textuality, the semiotic field of Brahmanism. So anyway, the point is that he began with all those struggles, and he was beginning with touching the water. And even today, even in places, in the borders of Kerala, Dalits cannot even go near the public wells. Even today it is happening in Govindapuram, in many places, in Tamil Nadu and in many borders of Kerala this is happening. Dalits cannot go and use the public well. Inter-caste and inter-dining, we talked about inter-dining and inter-marriage in Sahodharan. That happened 100 years back in Kerala, but even today, Dalit people are being humiliated or even killed for entering into an inter-marriage, an inter-caste marriage. They are literally something called the honor killings are happening. It's a common thing in North India, but in Kerala it was unknown. But in recent times, many so-called honor killings, they are actually caste killings. Many caste killings have happened in recent times. In Tenkurishi, Anish was killed. And in Tenmala, one person, Kevin Joseph, was killed. Brutally mutilated and tortured and humiliated and killed. Because he was into Christianity also. He was a Christian, but according to his in-laws, he was a Dalit Christian. And therefore, many dominant Christians, many Syrian Christians or the so-called casteist Christians of Kerala, and many other dominant people, they have cooperated and conspired, and they eventually hijacked him and mutilated and killed that boy called Kevin Joseph. He was a Christian, but even after baptizing in the blood of Christ, he was not spared, like the articulation of Poigil Appachan. Poigil Appachan, a great Dalit voice from Kerala, late 19th and early 20th century. Appachan has sung his songs and spirituals. And in one of the songs, Appachan says, even after baptizing in the blood of Christ, you are calling us Paraya and Puleya. Then what is your Christianity? What is the Christian love ethics that you are talking about? This was the question raised by Poigil Appachan or Poigil Yohanan. He was a great scholar in Bible. And he is also called the preacher Yohanan. But he worked with many churches and congregations, with the Marthoma Church and the Departure Church and the Brethren Mission and so many missions, but he had to abandon them all, and he created his own Dalit spiritual group or sect called Pratyaksha Raksha Daiva Sabha in 1910. You can read his songs and spirituals we have. And of course we must remember the great educational and human rights struggles of Mahatma Ayyankali also, and many other Dalit voices were here in Kerala. But despite all these so-called struggles and Renaissance cultural kind of revolutions, caste has come back into Kerala, as in many parts of this country. So caste killings and caste brutalities and atrocities are growing on an alarming rate, because the political power, the issue of political power and representation are not adequately even identified and addressed by our institutions and our governing kind of coalitions and the ruling elites in particular. So that is the importance of social justice and inclusion and representation. Without real representation of the people in the judicial process, in the legislative process, in the bureaucratic kind of cadres, you cannot achieve any form of justice or democracy. So the basic people who were excluded, the basic people who were denied fundamental rights and educational rights and representational rights, they must be given adequate, sufficient representation. So representation, all forms of representation, especially political representation, is the key. From the panchayats to the parliament, you need representation. And the representation must be ensured, not just Dalit men, but Dalit women. Women's representation, even that issue is not completely materialized even today. After some 20, 30 years of debate, women's reservation is not completely manifested. So, the issue of representation is to be addressed. That is the core of the Constitution. Social representation, social and educational backwardness, that is the key term used in the Constitution. For social exclusions and educational backwardness, this constitutional safeguard is being implemented. Article 15, Article 16, Article 46, and on many other occasions, Baba Sahib himself, he tried to refer to the scheduled castes, the scheduled tribes, and also the other backward communities, and their political right of representation is being asserted undoubtedly, but unfortunately, constitutionally it is for social and democratic, educational kind of exclusions. But now there is a subversion that is happening where the economic dimension is being brought in, and the economic reservation is floated as the norm and the in thing. And unfortunately, even our own people, even Dalit Bahujans are believing in this kind of a gimmick. Actually, it is for social inequality, because inequality, exclusion, denial of rights, it was all based on caste and gender in India, not based on class or any economic kind of consideration. It was not based on your economics. Ayyankali was able to buy that bullock cart from Tamil Nadu, from Chennai, and he brought it here. But he couldn't ride on his bullock cart here because caste was the problem. He had the money, he had the leverage and the kind of economic mobility and all, influence and all. But he couldn't ride on that on the public roads of Kerala because for the untouchable, for the Avarna, it was prohibited. It was based on the Varna and caste. And of course on gender and not on the class or economic kind of status. So rights were denied, exclusion was based on caste in India. For thousands of years, at least for 2000 years in North India, and at least for 1200 years in South India, even in Kerala, from the 8th century onwards, this Brahminical Chaturvarnyam, this Varnashrama Dharma was enforced on us. So the point of discrimination was caste and not class. It was social exclusion. It was not economic exclusion. So therefore, the remedy should also be social kind of mobility and upliftment and not an economic criterion. So unfortunately, the economic criterion is now mixed up with reservations in India, and the social justice paradigm is subdued, diluted, compromised, and gradually undone. Many creamy layer issues, and in the case of OBCs, the idea of economic kind of exclusions, economic categories were created, and now that is being, they are planning to extend it to the SC, STs as well. So this kind of divide and rule and mixing up of various economic categories into the social issue of representation, that is called reservations in India. So these things have diluted and compromised and almost suspended the liberative potentials of the constitution that Baba Sahib has created. This is one of the greatest threats that we are facing today, and at least the Dalit Bahujans in India must come up and must rise up together to speak against this injustice, and we must do it in a very peaceful, democratic and legal way as shown by Ambedkar, and we must challenge it in the court of law and also through this public and social kind of debates and discussions and creation of a greater discourse through public sphere and media and social media paradigms. And we must forge ahead with the ideas of social justice that is the foundation of the Constitution of India and the constitutional values of liberty, equality and justice, and also the greater values of socialism and democracy and secularism. All these things are under threat because of the growing intolerance and the atrocities done on the minorities in particular, the citizenship issues, and many other forms of otherizing and demonizing discourses going around the country. So it is high time to rise against these anti-democratic, anti-human kind of tendencies in our country and protect the social justice and democratic social democracy core and paradigm of the Constitution. Once again, congratulate and thank the organizers, and I thank you for your patient listening. Jai Bhim.